Hey guys, Collin Chi, certified nutritional consultant, numerologist, bringing you guys another talk today. Today, I'm going to be talking about this book called Against Love by Laura Kipnis. Okay, I have some other videos on this channel about love, so check them out. I'll put a link in the description below. But I wanted to do a video on this book because it takes a different perspective. It's really against love. That's why it's called Against Love. But it's not really truly against love. It's more against traditional coupledom and marriage, and kind of giving you some ideas about why people stray from marriage and adultery, and what happens when you suppress your desires. Why love is touted as this end-all be-all most important thing in society, and the social controls that have created certain character types that make us really think that love is the most important thing, that we need to base our whole identity and being on it. And I'm gonna be reading some excerpts, but mainly this, I'll be talking about the concept of whether working on relationships works or not. There's some good quotes on in here. What marriage has actually been historically versus what it is today. Again, about the suppressing the sexual curiosities that we all have and what happens when you do that. A little bit about the ideas about love usurping the place of where God and where God used to be and religion used to be the center of our existence. Now it's all about love and science. There's been a different paradigm shift, and so I'm going to talk about some of that stuff. Renunciation of desires, repression of desires, regression, socialization. So let me read some excerpts and let me jump into this because hopefully you guys will be interested. Who would dream of being against love? No one. But is there something a bit worrisome about all this uniformity of opinion? Is this the one subject about which no disagreement will be entertained, about which one truth alone is permissible? Consider that the most powerful organized religions produce the occasional heretic. Every ideology has its apostates. Even sacred cows find their butchers, except for love. Hence the necessity for a polemic against it. A polemic is designed to be the prose equivalent of a small explosive device placed under your easy boy lounger. It won't injure you, well, not severely. It's just supposed to shake things up and rattle a few convictions. So it's really shaking up this idea that everything has to be all about love and relationships and monogamy. This woman is obviously sees that monogamy is not as natural as and it's, I think she must have a background in sociology because she really mentions a lot of sociologists and their perspectives on all this stuff. So let me read some more. I'm going to read a bunch of excerpts. Hopefully you guys will like it. There's no way of being against love precisely because we moderns are constituted as beings yearning to be filled, craving connection, needing to adore and be adored, because love is vital plasma and everything else in the world just tap water. We prostrate ourselves at love's portals, anxious for entry, like social strivers waiting at the rope line outside some exclusive club, hoping to gain admission to its plushy chambers, thereby confirming our essential worth and making us interesting to ourselves. Interesting. So we're not interesting to our own selves. We've created, relationships and love has become our identity. So and we're clawing at we're all so anxious to be filled, and we're so needy and things like this. So let's see what else here. A happy state of monogamy would be defined as a state you don't have to work at maintaining. After all, doesn't the demand for fidelity beyond the duration of desire feel like work? Or work as currently configured for so many of us, handmaidens to the global economy, alienated, routinized, deadening, and not something you would choose to do if you actually had a choice in the matter? Okay. Happy state of monogamy, a happy state, would be not having to work on your relationship, is basically not having to work on it, because we're already overworked. Yes, we all know that good marriages take work. We've been well tutored in the catechism of labor-intensive intimacy. Work, work, work. Given all the heavy lifting required, what's the difference between work and after work again? Work/home, office/bedroom, are you ever not on the clock? Good relationships may take work, but unfortunately, when it comes to love, trying is always trying too hard. Work doesn't work. Erotically speaking, play is what works. Or as psychoanalyst Adam Phillips puts it, in our erotic life, it is no more possible to work at a relationship than it is to will an erection or arrange to have a dream. In fact, when you are working at it, you know it has gone wrong, that something is already missing. Yet here we are, toiling away. Somehow, how exactly did this happen? The work ethic has managed to brown nose its way into all spheres of human existence. No more play or playing around, even when off the clock. Of course, the work ethic long ago penetrated the leisure sphere. Leisure, once a respite from labor, now takes quite a lot of work itself. Think about it the next time you find yourself repetitively lifting heavy pieces of metal after work. In other words, working out. Being wedded to the work ethic is not exactly a new story. This strain runs deep in middle-class culture. Think about it the next time you're lying awake contemplating any of those 4 a.m. Raison d'etre, it's a French word, I don't know exactly what it means, probably means reasons. Questions about your self-worth or social value. What have I really accomplished? But when did the rhetoric of the factory become the default language of love, and does this mean that collective bargaining should now replace marriage counseling when negotiating for improved domestic conditions? When monogamy becomes labor, when desire is organized contractually, with accounts kept and fidelity extracted like labor from employees, with marriage a domestic factory policed by means of rigid shop floor discipline designed to keep the wives and husbands and domestic partners of the world choke-chained to the status quo machinery, is this really what we mean by a good relationship? Back in the old days, social brooders like Freud liked to imagine that there was a certain basic lack of fit between our deepest instincts and society's requirements of us, which might have left us all a little neurosis-prone, but at least guaranteed some occasional resistance to the more stifling demands of socialization. But in the old days, work itself occasionally provided motives for resistance, the struggle over wages and conditions, of course, and even the length of the workday itself. Labor and capital may have eventually struck a temporary truce at the 8-hour day, but look around, it's in advance crumbling as we speak. Givebacks are the name of the game, and not just on the job either. With the demands of labor-intensive intimacy and working on your relationship, now it's double shifting for everyone. Or should we just call it vertical integration, the same compulsory overtime and capricious directives, the dress codes and attitude assessments, those dreaded annual performance reviews, and don't forget achieving orgasm. But recall that back in the old days, the promise of technological progress was actually supposed to be less work rather than more. Now that's an antiquated concept, gone the way of the dodo birds and trade unionism. How can you not admire a system so effective at swallowing all alternatives to itself that it can make something as abject as working for love sound admirable? Punching in, punching out, trying to wrest love from the bosses when not busily toiling in the mine shafts of domesticity, or is it the other way around? It should come as no surprise as work sociologist Arlie Russell Hochschild reports that one of the main reasons for the creeping expansion of the official workday is that a large segment of the labor force put in those many extra hours because they're avoiding going home. Apparently, domestic life has become such a chore that staying at the office is more relaxing. Okay, so interesting. Let me read this last one. Why work so hard? Because there's no other choice? But maybe there is. After all, technological progress could reduce necessary labor to a minimum had this ever been made a social goal. If the goal of progress were freeing us from necessity instead of making a select few marvelously rich while the luckless rest toil away. Okay, so yes, the ideas of work, to work hard is much aggrandized for sure, and much vaunted, as she mentions later. To work hard, well, really, individuality is what she says, but I'm saying to work hard is definitely vaunted because you want to achieve things, right? Working hard is the way to get to a place of achieving something. That's the way to achieve something, right? You got to work hard to get there. And Americans are just so overworked in general that it becomes part of ourselves, and we have to adopt that robotic, that work mentality, because it's the only way to stay afloat. It's the only way to achieve what we want to achieve, and we want so much as Americans. We want more. We always want more and want more and want more. We're kind of programmed to stay in this work ethic mode. And yes, this is a good principle to think about if you're trying to achieve something. But when it comes to relationships, does working on a relationship really work? I think it can if the relationship is really worth it. Okay? Is the work that you have to put into this relationship really truly worth it? Is this person that you're working on this relationship with, is she worth it, or is he worth it? If not, then work is not really going to work. It's not going to fix the relationship. So you have to ask yourself, is this person really worth the work? Because I'm already overworked. I'm already, got too much work to do. And, other countries, they have these long lunch hours, and they're not so programmed about about work. Americans are just way too overworked. I mentioned, concepts about work in my other talk on love. But some of the stuff I mentioned was that, I mentioned, I think, Rilke and some other people, working on becoming something and working on becoming somebody valuable in order to be ready for love and worthy of love was the main stuff I was talking about in there. I mentioned work as day labor or something, if you watch my video. Yes, again, work on your relationship if it's worth it. Okay? If it's not worth it, don't do it. And move on, because it's not going to work. According to her, this is one perspective, and according to kind of what I think also, you have to assess whether it's worth it. So, but the Rilke, like I said, is working on yourself and working on becoming valuable is in order to be ready and worthy of love is different than working on your relationship. Okay. The history of love is written differently by every historian who tackles the subject, without becoming mired in their internecine debates. We can still say with certainty that nothing in the historical or anthropological record indicates that our amorous predecessors were working on their relationships. Nor until relatively recently was marriage the expected venue for eros or romantic love, nor was the presumptive object of romantic love your own husband or wife, more likely someone else's. Nor did anyone expect it to endure a lifetime. When practiced, it tended to be practiced episodically and largely outside the domicile. Okay, marriage was not the avenue for romantic love that it is today. People blame Rousseau that he was the one that caused some of that to change. It used to be a business partnership, an economic kind of unit, in order to, survive, and in order to have enough money and have a household that would run properly. It wasn't the avenue for all of our romantic ideals and poetic, eros. Just how much renunciation of desire does society demand of us versus the degree of gratification it provides? Therapy. This is kind of a definition of therapy, I guess. A newly arisen service industry owing its pricey existence to the cheery idea that ambivalence is a curable condition, that growth means adjustment to prevailing conditions, and that rebellion is neurotic, though thankfully curable. Desire is regressive and antisocial. There's no cure, which is what makes it the wild card in our little human drama. That was according to Freud. You can be fairly certain it's not going to be those social norms that need a tune-up. Sorry, hun, it's you. Okay, so she's talking about these social norms, these social character type roles that we all play. And that we're programmed into, and that we should actually be changing these social forms and these social types that have been created, that we're supposed to mold ourselves to and supposed to be adjusted to. A lot of people are maladjusted to life and maladjusted to socialization because it's so stringent and strict and forces all of our desires into these compartments and makes us robotic. With an estimated 30 million Americans, or around 10% of the adult population, having ingested antidepressants to date, better living through chemistry is now the favored social solution. Just say goodbye to your sex life. Okay. Let me read a little more of this. It screws up all well-ordered plans and lives, and to be alive is to be fundamentally... Hold on, let me see. So don't sign up for therapy if you're looking for radical social insights, or social insights at all, actually. What's for sale here is self-knowledge. Only a cynic could suspect it of being remedial socialization in party clothes. As you will soon discover under the tutelage of your kindly therapist, all those excess desires have their roots in some childhood deprivation or trauma which has led to lack of self-esteem, or some other impeded development which has made you unable to achieve proper intimacy and thus prone to searching for it in all the wrong places, namely anywhere outside the home. Conflicts in the realm of desire act out something unresolved in the self, a deeply buried trove of childhood memories or injuries that you will spend years excavating in regular office visits at no small cost. But don't resist. The more you resist, the longer it takes, and the more you'll pay in 45-minute increments and at fees far exceeding the median daily wage. But happily, you will soon be feeling far better about yourself and at peace with your desires and conflicts. If not, the same results can be attained in easy-to-swallow capsule form. Okay, she's making fun of therapy. Another of the company goons, culture. She's talking about, consumer culture here, really. Consider the blaringly omnipresent propaganda beaming into our psyches on an hourly basis, the millions of images of love-struck couples looming over us from movie screens, televisions, billboards, magazines, incessantly strong-arming us on board the love train. Every available two-dimensional surface touts love. Okay, I get kind of irked by this too, which is why I'm reading this book to you guys as well. A lot of these are my thoughts. That every song on the radio is about love. Every billboard, every, commercial is either about buying the diamond ring or pharmaceutical drugs. It's one of the two. And it's just programming you to value these things, to value consumerism, to value, relationships more so than valuing yourself, or more so than valuing becoming knowledgeable, or becoming interesting, or becoming a better person, or whatever it is, whatever other values are better. Not to mention the regression, because after all, you've chosen your parent, or worse, you've become your parent, tormenting or withdrawing from the mate as the same or opposite sex parent once did, replaying scenes you were once subjected to yourself as a helpless child, or some other variety of family repetition that will keep those therapists guessing for years. Given everything, a success rate of 50% seems about right, assuming that success means longevity. Or here's another way to tell the story of modern love. Let's imagine that to achieve consensus and continuity, any society is required to produce the kinds of character structures and personality types it needs to achieve its objective, to perpetuate itself, molding a populace's desires to suit particular social purposes. Take the modern consumer, just a random example. Clearly, routing desire into consumption would be necessary to sustain a consumer society. A citizenry who fucked in lieu of shopping would soon bring the entire economy grinding to a standstill. Or better still, take the modern depressive. What a boon to both the pharmaceutical and the social harmony industries such a social type would be. Okay, so it's kind of like, these industries are churning out these social character types to force us to want to live up to them and value those social types in order for them to make more money. Okay. The only social purpose of compulsory marriage for life. Okay, hold on. Let me go back. In fact, according to renegade psychoanalyst Wilhelm Reich, a Frankfurt School fellow traveler, the only social purpose of compulsory marriage for life is to produce the submissive personality types that mass society requires. He also took the view, along with Freud, that suppressing sexual curiosity leads to general intellectual atrophy. Okay, this is kind of interesting because a lot of our motivations to be this great person, to be smart, to be valuable, to be to make money, a lot of our motivations are in order to get the girl, especially young people, teenagers, obviously that's the first thing they're all about, and that usually carries over until you hit your midlife crisis. For most people, you're all about relationships and just trying to get the girl and trying to get the relationship, and you do all these things in order to make yourself worthy of that by but most people make themselves worthy in stupid pursuits, like, not stupid, but there are, better pursuits, mainly the materialism, is the pursuit that most people take. Oh, I got to get a bunch of money, then I'll get the girl, So doing this, once you finally get that girl that you want, right? You finally get her. Now what? Now your intellect is kind of atrophied. All your motivation that you had is atrophied. That's why people get so comfortable in relationships and start to gain a lot of weight, and they don't really have any motivation anymore because their entire, deep down drive for everything they were doing was to get that girl. So now what? Once you have the girl, now your only motivation could be to go after other girls, really. I mean, the truth of the matter is, too, folks, that if you're a woman, please try not to be offended by this. This is just the truth of the matter, though. Every masculine man on this earth, if you are a 7, or let's say you're a 7 or an 8 or above, if you're decently hot, if you're decently attractive, every masculine man on earth wants to bang and wants to have sex with every attractive girl out there. That's the truth. Okay? I said focus on the word masculine man. Okay? Any man that has a decent libido, which a lot of people don't these days, but any man that still has any bit of libido, they want to bang every hot chick that's out there. That's just the truth. Yeah, some men can kind of suppress it enough and lie enough and fake it enough and tell their girlfriend lies like, oh, you're the only one for me and stuff like that. And yeah, it may be true on the level of, or if you've become very mature and you're focused on other things and you're not this child, let's say you're focused on your career, you're focused on other things, and yeah, and you've already been through, if you're older and you've been through a lot of stuff already, and your whole purpose is not based on getting the girl, then yeah, you're not gonna bang every girl, but you still want to because that's just the way men are. We want to bang every hot chick. That's just the way it is. And if you don't believe that, you don't accept that as a woman, you don't realize that, you're just being deluded and lied to by your guy, and he's able to repress it enough to where he doesn't show that. Other guys just are out with it and just show that. Anyway, that's kind of my little take on that. But the intellectual atrophy is what I got off topic a little. So, your whole intellect, all your creative ideas, you don't know what to do anymore with yourself because you now have the hot chick. So, unless your motivations were for different purposes, unless you're a more complete, more amazing person, that your motivations are deeper and more foundational than just, getting the chick. But a lot of people, this is the case, though, that their whole desire, their whole motivations is just, sex and relationships. So I'm just painting the picture of the against love side, Capitalism itself clearly requires certain character structures to sustain it, and would never have gotten off the ground, according to early sociologist Max Weber, if it weren't for the prep work of religious asceticism. Capitalism only succeeded, says Weber, because it happened along the heyday of Calvinism, already busy churning out personalities so steeped in sacrifice that the capitalist work ethic wasn't a difficult sell. Okay, so we're transitioning from the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius, right? This supposedly happened around the 60s, 70s, 80s. It's been happening. It's a slow process. And you're in each age, I think, for 2,000 years. So this is, the precession of the equinox, the planets, and the zodiac and whatnot. So we're in the age of Aquarius now. We were in the age of Pisces, the age of sacrifice, the age of I believe, which is why Jesus was our biggest moral figure that we all wanted to live up to, that everybody admired back then, because those were the values of the time, the Piscean values, which are sacrifice, which are I believe, versus the Aquarian age is I know. So now we're getting into the age of science. We think we know things now because of science. We're getting away from religion. I just read something recently that, religion, the fastest growing religion is no religion. Okay, Nietzsche declared that God is dead, and rightly so, because religion is not really, people don't value religion as much as they used to. Science and love have usurped the place of where religion was. Okay, religion was at the center, used to be. Now it's all about science. Now it's all about love and relationships. But the Aquarian age, Aquarians are independent, whereas Pisceans are self-sacrificial. Okay, so all about sacrificing yourself for others and for for your and for your spouse, and squelching your own self to now independence. And yes, Aquarians are the humanitarians, but it's different than a Piscean humanitarian. Okay, Aquarians are all about, and that makes sense too, because Aquarians are all about science and discovery and invention and electronics and interesting things like this that are happening now. Okay, so what I'm getting at is, yes, these days self-care and the self and individuality is much vaunted for sure. Yet also there's still this lingering old paradigm of sacrificing and martyrdom that we still like, especially the generation before, especially like my parents' generation and their parents' generation, that especially like the going to war, the soldiers, the martyrs, sacrificing yourself for country, sacrificing yourself for your spouse or for whoever, giving up your own life for the good of your children, for the good of, those values are still holding on because people are still alive from those older paradigms. Okay, now it's shifting more into self-care is now sacred, right? Self-improvement, self-help, the self is getting more at the forefront. Emerson and the Renaissance, or not the Renaissance, but the Romantics, kind of shifted this also, and the American Revolution and certain things. So, capitalism, but hopefully this is giving you some ideas about this. I don't know. As I said, capitalism only succeeded because, basically of Calvinism, which was turning out personality so steeped in sacrifice, and that the capitalist work ethic wasn't a difficult sell. Okay, that sacrifice yourself to the job, to work, in order to, yet capitalism is kind of all about individualism too. It's just, I understand this on a level. I don't know how to explain it, but hopefully you just get the quote. So whatever. Observe such types, your friends and neighbors, toiling away at work and home, each accompanied by an internal commanding officer, issuing a steady string of silent directives. Willpower, grow up, be realistic, get busy, don't play around. And thus we become psyches for whom repression has its own seductions. How virtuous it feels, trading play for industry, freedom for authority, and any lingering errant desires for mature realizations like good relationships take work. Okay, how virtuous it feels to trade, your desires for being this character type, being the boss man, being the, that these become your identity, because if you haven't found your own identity, the only way you find your own identity is through a lot of suffering and pain, and which destroys a lot of the illusions and delusions that you have. Us rebel, more like trained poodles prancing on hind legs, yipping for approval and doggy treats. But just in case any vestiges of freedom or any tattered remnants still available after childhood's brute socialization will need to be checked at the door before entering the pleasure palace of domestic coupledom, should you desire entry, that is. And who among us does not? Because who can be against love? But just for fun, try this quick thought experiment. Imagine the most efficient kind of social control possible. It wouldn't be a soldier on every corner, too expensive, too crass. Wouldn't the most elegant means of producing acquiescence be to somehow transplant those social controls so seamlessly into the guise of individual needs that the difference between them dissolved? And here we have the distinguishing political feature of the liberal democracies. Their efficiency at turning out character types who identify so completely with society's agenda for them that they volunteer their very beings to the cause. But how would such a feat be accomplished? What mysterious force or mind-altering substance could compel an entire population into such total social integration without them even noticing it happening or uttering the tiniest peep of protest? What if it could be accomplished through love? Okay. Love as the thing that is making us become these social types that want to sacrifice ourselves to, and this love is society's agenda. Okay, marriage, you only get benefits. You get all these benefits if you decide to marry somebody, right? Yet you don't get these benefits if you don't marry somebody. Insurance benefits, car insurance, regular insurance, whatever it may be. So it's like, they're pumping you with these ideas that love is the most important thing and that you should be all about relationships and love. Not everybody's capable of love. Not everybody should be all about love. So some people are not all about that. There's different types of people out there. You don't have to have a relationship. You don't have to have love. And it's hard for you to believe that, right? Because it's so deeply programmed into you. You can't even fathom or contemplate anything beyond that. But it's out there. It does exist. There are some people that are not all about relationships, okay? Clearly, love is subject to just as much regulation as any powerful pleasure-inducing substance. Love's proper denouement, matrimony, is also, of course, the social form regulated by the state, which refashions itself as benevolent pharmacist doling out the addictive substance in licensed doses. It could always be worse. The other junkies are forced to huddle outside neighborhood clinics in the cold for their little paper cups. Love at least gets treated with a little pomp and ceremony. Of course, no one is physically held down and forced to swallow vows, and not all those who love acquire the proper licenses to do so, but what a remarkable compliance rate is nevertheless achieved. Why bother to make marriage compulsory when informal compulsions work so well that even gays, once such paragons of unregulated sexuality, once so contemptuous of white-bread hetero lifestyles, are now demanding state regulation too? What about re-envisioning the form, rethinking the premises? What about re-envisioning the form, rethinking the premises? What about just insisting that social resources and privileges not be allocated on the basis of marital status? No, let's demand regulation. Not that it's particularly easy to re-envision anything when these intersections of love and acquiescence are the very backbone of the modern self, when every iota of self-worth and identity hinge on them, along with insurance benefits. Okay? Your identity has become all about love, all about relationships. There are different types of love. She's talking about coupledom and, marriage and the, normal, romantic eros kind of love. She's not talking about unconditional love, universal love, brotherhood. These are different forms of love, okay? Loving all mankind. These are different forms. She's talking about how the modern self, unless you are self-aware. If you're self-aware, this hasn't happened to you, obviously. But it takes a lot of time and pain to become self-aware, okay? Some happens to them quicker than others. Some it never happens. Some go through their entire lives just living their whole personality being made up of what society has conditioned into them to value and believe, and not ever challenging or not ever having informed beliefs or informed opinions because they never read a book, things like this. So here you are, gay or straight, guy or gal, with matrimony or some functional equivalent achieved, domestication complete, steadfastly pledged and declawed, a house-trained kitten. But wait, what's that nagging little voice at the edge of your well-being? The one that refuses to shut up even when jabbed with the usual doses of shame. The one that says, isn't there supposed to be something more? Well, maybe there is, but don't go getting any ideas, because an elaborate domestic security apparatus is on standby, ready to stomp the life out of them before they can breed. Stomp them dead like the filthy, home-wrecking cockroaches they are. Okay, she talks a lot about adultery in here and, home-wrecking cockroaches. That it's unnatural to force our desires into trying to get all of our needs satisfied by one person and monogamy. Okay, she's kind of against that. Here we come to the weak link in the security state model of long-term coupledom, desire. It's ineradicable. You're supposed to be channeling all such affective capacities into the appropriate venues and everything. Social stability, the national fabric, being a good person, hinges on making sure that you do. That was parentheses. So everything hinges on making sure that you do. That you channel all your desires into the appropriate venues. Okay, being a good person, social stability, security, the national fabric. But renunciation chafes, particularly when the quantities demanded begin to exceed the amount of gratification achieved. Okay, but renouncing your own desires. Okay, you renounce your desires because you're forced to only desire this one person for the rest of your life when you're married, which is unnatural. Okay, so she's talking about renunciation of your own desires. But renunciation chafes, particularly when the quantities demanded begin to exceed the amount of gratification achieved. For instance, when basic monogamy evolves, as it inevitably does under such conditions, into surplus monogamy, enforced compliance rather than a free expression of desire, or repressive satisfaction in Marcuse's still handy, still stinging phrase. The problem, repressive satisfaction. Okay, you're satisfied, but in a repressed way. You're not truly, you're deluding yourself that you're satisfied. You're in denial, because you're forced to be, because of this socialization process and modern culture. The problem is that maybe we're really not such acquiescent worker bees in our desires, and maybe there actually isn't consent about being reduced to the means to an end, especially when the end is an overused platitude about the social fabric, whatever that is, meaning what? That we'll all just churn out the proper emotions to uphold calcified social structures, like cows produce milk, like machines spit out O-rings. But start thinking like that, and who knows what can happen. And that's the problem with dissatisfaction. It gives people ideas, maybe even critical ideas. First a glimmering, then an urge, then a transient desire, soon a nascent thought. Maybe there's something else. Recall that the whole bothersome business with labor unions and workers demanding things like shorter workdays started out the same way. A few troublemakers got fed up with being treated like machines, word spread, and pretty soon there was a whole movement. Wanting more is a step on the way to a political idea. Or so say political theorists, and ideas can have a way of turning themselves into demands. Okay, so, the big corporations wouldn't want that, right? I mean, and, our government wouldn't want us to start questioning all these things, questioning vaccines, or questioning GMOs, or questioning love, or questioning, the foundations of science, or questioning anything, for that matter. They just want worker bees, right? But note the charges typically... I'm having trouble speaking today. Maybe I need some water. But note the charges typically leveled against the adulterer: immaturity, failure to demonstrate the requisite degree of civilized repression, in parentheses, that's her definition of immaturity. Failure to demonstrate the requisite degree of civilized repression, repressing your desires. Okay, the charge is typically leveled against adulterers. Okay, immaturity, selfishness, parentheses, failure to work for the collective good, a somewhat selectively imposed requirement in corporate America, boorishness, or parentheses, failure to achieve proper class behavior, or the extra fillip of moral trumping. People will get hurt, though perhaps amputated desires hurt too. Okay? We're getting to an interesting quote, forcing your desires into one little tiny narrow avenue, okay? Making that your all everything, which is what we're programmed to do, amputates your limbs. You're not free. Domestic coupledom is the boot camp for compliant citizenship, a training ground for gluey resignation and immobility. Social institution. Remember, this is meant to be dramatic. It's meant to be against love, and it's meant to be negative, the negatory side being, it's meant to be hyperbole and exaggerated. Okay, it doesn't take into account a balance here of good love and bad love. Watch my whole video on, what is love, because that will give you a much more balanced view of all these, of what love is, and try and define it and all things like that. This is mainly just attacking love, because that's what it's meant to do. And social institutions are as petrified as Mesozoic rock formations. We polemicists, too, are propelled to intellectual promiscuity, rashness, and blind risks, and becoming the neighborhood pariah or joke, just for thinking there could be reasons to experiment with reimagining things. Don't forget that all outbreaks of love outside sanctioned venues still invite derisive epitaphs like cheating or midlife crisis, while those that play by the rules will be community sanctified with champagne and gifts in the expensive, over-rehearsed costume rituals of the wedding industrial complex, its participants stiffly garbed in the manner of landed gentry from some non-existent epoch, clearly playing out unnatural roles, is structured into these initiation rites as a test of the participant's stamina for role playing. Adultery is one way of protesting the confines of coupled life. Of course, there's always murder. Neither is necessarily proposed as a solution. Given the regularity with which episodes of spousal mayhem hit the newsstands, evidently opting for homicide over the indignities of divorce court or the travails of marriage counseling not infrequently strikes overwrought wives, husbands, lovers, and exes as the only available solution to the frustrating impasses of togetherness and the emotional thickets of relationships. Should love come packaged with health advisories? Caution may be addictive as well as harmful to your ongoing survival or to your dignity or self-worth. Should coupling be categorized as a high-risk activity if it regularly leads habitues to such extremes of antisocial behavior and creative acts of mayhem? It's generally understood that falling in love means committing to commitment. Falling in love also commits us to merging, meaning that unmerging, when this proves necessary, is ego-shattering and generally traumatic. Adult love doesn't ever completely quell that constitutional human sense of lack and separation trauma that sets its quest in motion. Anxiety is not just endemic to the enterprise, it's also incurable. This is according to Freud, basically. However assiduously we devote ourselves to love's pursuit and conquest, the fretful specter of loss permeates the scene. Okay, so she's talking about, ego and anxiety of, the ego's role is to avoid anxiety. And, it's just the whole premise of the kind of love that's programmed into us by modern culture. That kind of all-encompassing, fantasy kind of love that it's all about one person, soulmate, and channel all my desires into this one person and expect all my needs be met from one person. It's a false premise. It's not a, and that's why it's full of anxiety. Because it's just structured wrong to begin with. The question remaining unaddressed is whether cutting off other possibilities of romance and sexual attraction while there's still some dim chance of attaining them in favor of the more muted pleasures of mature love isn't similar to voluntarily amputating a healthy limb. A lot of anesthesia is required and the phantom pain never entirely abates. But if it behooves a society to convince its citizenry that wanting change means personal failure, starting over is shameful, or wanting more satisfaction than you have is illegitimate, clearly grisly acts of self-mutilation will be required. Note that there hasn't always been quite such optimism about love's longevity, nor was the supposed fate of social stability tied to making it last beyond its given duration. For the Greeks, love was a disordering and thus preferably brief experience. The goal of marriage, an orderly and well-managed household, not a path towards salvation or self-realization. In the reign of courtly love, love was illicit and usually fatal. Passion meant suffering. The happy ending didn't yet exist in the cultural imagination. As for togetherness as an eternal ideal, the 12th century advice manual De Amor et Amoris Remedio, treatise on love and its remedies, warned that too many opportunities to see or chat with the beloved would certainly decrease love. Okay, this is why I don't like living with, my partner always, or my, relationship, the person I'm in a relationship with, because it becomes more stale if you're around the person all the time, you fight more, things like this. I like to see the woman twice a week. No more than that. There's not even enough time for that, barely even, because we're all working. Our whole day is, you work 11-hour shifts, your whole day's gone. You have one day to yourself out of your entire week to do something with your life. besides your job. The innovation of happy love didn't even enter the vocabulary. The innovation of happy love didn't even enter the vocabulary of romance until the 17th century. Before the 18th century, when the family was primarily an economic unit instead of a hothouse of unmet needs, marriages were business alliances arranged between families, and participants had little to say in the matter. Passion was what you had outside marriage. Wives were a form of property. Wifely adultery was a breach of male property rights, and worse, it mucked up the orderly transmission of property via inheritance. It was only with the rise of the bourgeois, whose social power was no longer based on land holdings and inherited wealth, that marriages based on love rather than family alliances became the accepted practice. In other words, love matches became socially acceptable once they no longer posed an economic threat to the class in power. There are different ways to tell the story, and the historians all disagree, but it's evident from all accounts that our amatory predecessors didn't share our particular aspirations about their romantic lives. At least they didn't devote themselves to trying to sustain a fleeting experience past its shelf life or transform it into the basis of a long-term relationship. But the emphasis on love as a uniquely individual experience presupposes the existence of the modern individual. Each one of us, an embattled and unique personality searching moors and countryside for that one beloved counterpart who will meet our unique psychological needs, conceptions of the self that, according to most historians, had little currency much before the late 17th century. In fact, a number of historians consider our version of romantic love a learned behavior that became fashionable only in the late 18th century, along with the new fashion for novel reading, the novel itself being a then recent cultural form invented precisely to explore all the hidden crevices of this newly burgeoning individuality. Alan Bloom blames it all on Rousseau, who saw bourgeois love as a salve for the empty emotional center of restrained, law-bound societies, and so elevated romance into a soul-saving experience. At least consider the fundamental social differences that provided the texture of pre-modern personal life. For instance, the near total absence of privacy prior to the 18th century. Historian Philippe Aries, until the end of the 17th century, nobody was ever left alone, or the complete legal subordination of women to men. Then there's sex. As literary scholar Ruth Perry points out, another 18th century innovation was sexual disgust. When Charlotte Lucas marries the repellent Mr. Collins in Pride and Prejudice in a pragmatic match and talks it over afterward with her girlfriends, there's no hint that sharing the bed of an odious man might cause a girl feelings of disgust. The point is that sex didn't have the same psychological resonance as it does for the contemporary psyche. Physical revulsion at sex with the wrong person was a learned and socially instituted response. Okay, she's just saying according to, some of these people. However, much the decline of arranged marriages is held up in this part of the globe as a sign of progress and enlightenment, including lately as propaganda for modernity when seeking to score political points against Islam. However much it flatters our illusions of independence to imagine that we get to love whomever and however we please, this story starts to unravel if you look too closely. Despite all the putative freedom, the majority of us select partners remarkably similar to ourselves economically and in social standing, education, and race. That is, we choose appropriate mates, and we precisely calculate their assets, with each party gauging just how well they can do on the open market, knowing exactly their own exchange value and that of prospective partners. Exchange value includes your looks, of course. Look closely at newspaper engagement announcement photos, as social psychologists have, in fact, done and reported upon, and you will note that virtually every couple is quite precisely matched for a degree of physical attractiveness. Scratch the romantic veneer, and we're hard-nosed realists armed with pocket calculators, calipers, and magnifying glasses. Okay, some of this is a stretch, in my opinion, of course, but it's also because, I'm, I don't know, whatever. Ranking mates for material and social assets is now incorporated into the psychology of love and unconscious structures of desire, with individuals having now internalized the economic rationality once exerted by parents, thus freely falling in love with mates who are also coincidentally good investments. Nevertheless, economic rationality in mate selection is now largely tacit in mainstream speech codes rather than the open matter it once was. And to ensure that it stays tacit, we've devised a useful vocabulary of paralogical terms like chemistry and clicking, as more descriptive terms like economic self-interest aren't considered polite. We do retain slightly dusty terms like gold digger or fortune hunter for those who jump rank or aren't subtle enough about their economic motives for current sensitivities. In other words, despite all the supported freedom, the social rules governing mate selection are as finicky and precise as they were in Jane Austen's day. The difference is that it's now taboo to acknowledge them. Falling in love itself is subject to the same bans on cognition. Social protocols dictate that it be regarded as an elusive and slightly irrational procedure. Too much rationality or thinking risks killing the romance. Okay, people just jump into these relationships because they want to fall in love, rather than thinking about and basing their actions on their own intentions and values and principles and goals and what's going to be right for me in my future. Sometimes it's people just, if you overthink it, and because you want love to be this magical, soul-saving, special thing that you're looking for God basically in love. You're looking for, a religious or a meaningful view, a meaningful view of life, or a worldview. It's getting channeled into love and science, rather than, something more spiritual and righteous. It's hard not to be aware that all is not so preachy. I'm trying to get through this. I know this is a long video so far, but there's not too much more here. But let's see. It's hard not to be aware that all is not so preachy in the land of love and romance, as love has increasingly become the center of all emotional expression in the modern imagination. Marriage historian Lawrence Stone suggests rather jocularly, you can't help thinking that today's rising divorce rates are just a modern technique for achieving what was once achieved far more efficiently by early mortality. Interesting. Some couples do manage to perform enough psychical retooling to reshape the anarchy of desire to the confines of the marriage bed, plugging away at the task year after year like diligent assembly line workers, once a week, same time, same position, aided by the occasional fantasy or two to get the old motor to turn over or keep running or complete the trip. The erotic life of a nation of workaholics. If sex seems like work, clearly you're not working hard enough at it. She's being sarcastic. This modern belief that love lasts shapes us into particularly fretful psychological beings, perpetually in search of prescriptions, interventions, aids. Passion must not be allowed to die. Frequent professional consultation and attempted cures are thus routine. If every other aspect of nature can be tamed and transformed by technology, why not desire too? Desire may not have lasted a lifetime back in the old days. The one obstacle love can't overcome is time, Dennis de Rougemont says acerbically in Love in the Western World. Okay, the one obstacle love can't overcome is time. Back in the old days, but that was then and this is now, a brave new world of love. Then there are the assorted low-tech solution to desire's dilemmas. Take advice. In fact, take more and more advice until it's seeping out of your ears and pores. Relationship advice is a booming business these days. There are now some 50,000 couples therapists in the nation, in addition to all the ordinary therapists who just give relationship advice on the side. Obviously, maintaining a relationship nowadays is something no one should attempt to do on their own. It's far too complicated for ordinary, non-trained humans. Okay, she defines falling in love as mutual misrecognitions at one point here, which is kind of funny definition. Fundamentally, to achieve love and qualify for entry into that realm of salvation and transcendence known as the couple, you must be a lovable person. What precisely does this entail? Let's begin with the basics. Being lovable will, of course, require an acceptable level of social normalcy, personal hygiene, a suitable wardrobe, class-appropriate social skills. Any overly evident social abnormality will likely impede your progress toward acquiring love. Conceal where possible. But normalcy just gets you in the door. According to the tenets of modern love, lovability will also require a thorough knowledge of the intricacies of mutuality. Mutuality means recognizing that your partner has needs and being prepared to meet them. The modern self is constituted as a bundle of needs, hence the modern self she's talking about, which maybe this isn't the way the modern self should be. The modern self is constituted as a bundle of needs waiting to be met, meaning that intimacy will be by definition rather a fraught and anxious scene. This is largely because modern intimacy presumes that the majority of those needs can and should be met by one person alone. We love our needs because they make us the individuals we are, and the individual is much vaunted in our times. We hate our needs because they're what make us oversized, squalling, dependent infants, and maturity, as we constantly hear, is also much vaunted in our times. Nevertheless, meeting another's needs is what is known as intimacy, itself required to achieve the state known as psychological maturity, despite how closely it seems to reproduce the affective conditions of our childhoods. Trading compliance for love is the earliest social lesson learned. We learn it in our cribs. The protocols of companionate coupledom do typically require two individuals to coexist in an enclosed space for extended periods of time. In other words, domesticity. Of course, if you're a self-aware person, you can define your relationship how you want it to be. You can define love how you see fit. You don't have to take on this conditioning program. She's mainly just talking about all the conditioning programming that program us into these ideas of domesticity, these ideas of maturity, these ideas of romantic love that are rotten to the core, according to her. Not in her words, in my words, but, So make your own definitions of what love is to you and what a relationship should be and what it is and how you want it to be. Have your own intentions and, have your own ideas about what it should be. Don't just take it on, how society programs you to be. Domesticity will clearly require substantial quantities of compromise, flexibility, and adaptation simply to avoid mayhem, which, as we have seen in cases of intimate violence, proves not always sufficiently avoidable. Successful cohabitation requires reducing the differences between two individuals to, at the very minimum, the point of joint toleration, though often this point will not arrive until the will of at least one of the parties has been shrunken to manageable proportions, not unlike a tumor subjected to massive doses of radiation. Given the hold that post-romantic ideals of unconstrained individuality exert over our fundamental ideologies of the self, this can prove a perilous and threatening process. Nevertheless, both parties must be willing to jettison whatever aspects of individuality might prove irritating while being allowed to retain enough of it to feel their autonomy is not being sacrificed, even as it's being surgically excised. Okay? And this is also going to be the norm for people who are in just bad relationships and who are not very, intelligent people, but she's saying that, individuality in one way is so much part of our post-romantic ideals now that it's all about the individual. Yet our individuality, in order to come together as a couple, come together and merge and glue together as this one and compromise, coupledom, that's why compromise is very difficult for me. I mean, compromise is just, if you're compromising, if the relationship is causing you to compromise too much, then get out of it. If it's causing just a little bit of compromise that's worth it and that is going to challenge you and help you grow, stay in it. But if the compromise becomes if it takes so much compromise that you totally lose your individuality, depends on how much you value the self and how much you value individuality and how much you value being your own self, whether you're just, and whether you even have a self or not. A lot of people don't even have a self. But, she's kind of laying it out here. The freedom to develop one's own personality in one's own way is widely regarded as a fundamental human right of the modern individual, but isn't it also what makes certain mates so incredibly difficult to get along with? Okay, so there's this paradox, ideally, if you have the same values yet different virtues, or the same values yet different vices, same values but different virtues, like I said, you won't have to make as many compromises because you're the same type of person as your partner or your relationship. You have the same fundamental values. You're not going to have to make too many compromises. That's why if you're over compromising in order to stay together to the point that you just are unhappy now, then think twice about this relationship. Depends on whether it's worth it. If this woman or this man is worth the trouble, the work, the compromise. Okay? How amazing are they? Thus derives the fundamental bargain of sustained coupledom. Either individual's autonomy or freedom of movement is of secondary importance compared to the other person's security and peace of mind. And thus the rituals of modern domesticity, anxiety avoidance is so deeply structured into the fabric of domestic routine. You might be led to think that anxiety appeasement was modern coupledom's sustaining imperative. Okay? Making sure that there's no anxiety or no stresses, growth and progress and love, not peace. According to Tony Robbins, peace is not the goal of the family. It's growth and it's love and it's progress. It's not peace. You might be led to think that, where am I? This is why recurring phrases like, I told you I hate it when you, or can't you ever remember to, come to comprise the leitmotif of domestic conversation. You always / I never, nagging sarcasm, the tactical use of the silent treatment, role reversals, accuser one moment, accused the next, Vlad the Impaler today, tomorrow the injured party. Pop psychology supplies us with the term power struggle as one way of accounting for such dynamics, though one that certainly casts a rather Nietzschean pall over the domestic scene. Because there we are, poised between anxiety control and the death drive, tame domestic animals, in Nietzsche's apt phrase, taming our mates to secure their love. Okay? You're not a lion anymore, you're a kitten. Because of the form of coupledom. Unless you create a different form, create a different world, create your own relationship, create it, define the terms, define what it means. But people don't like to get into this business of thinking about love and thinking about their relationship and thinking about what love means to each person, and the different definitions might scare you. Okay? It's very complicated stuff. People are very different. A lot of people are very different from each other out there. She has this whole long sample of what you can't do because you're in a couple, which ends with a nice little statement. So I'm gonna only read about half of this because it's literally like 6 pages of you can't, so I'm only going to read some of it. You can't leave the house without saying where you're going. You can't not say what time you'll return. You can't stay out past midnight or 11 or 10 or dinner time or not come right home after work. You can't go out when the other person feels like staying home. You can't go to parties alone. You can't go out just to go out because you can't not be considerate of the other person's worries about where you are or their natural insecurities that you're not where you should be or about where you could be instead. You can't make plans without consulting the other person, particularly not evenings and weekends, or make decisions about leisure time usage without a consultation. You can't be a slob. You can't do less than 50% around the house, even if the other person wants to do 100 to 200% more house cleaning than you find necessary or even reasonable. You can't leave your books, tissues, shoes, makeup, mail, underwear, work, sewing stuff, or pornography lying around the house. You can't smoke. You can't smoke in the house. You can't leave cigarettes in cups. You can't amass more knickknacks than the other person finds tolerable. Likewise, sports paraphernalia, fiesta ware, or Daffy Duck collectibles. You can't leave the dishes for later, wash the dishes badly, not use soap, drink straight from the container, make crumbs without wiping them up, now not later. Or load the dishwasher according to the method that seems most sensible to you. You can't use dishes directly out of the dishwasher without unloading the whole thing. You can't accumulate things that you think you just might use someday if the other person thinks you won't. You can't throw wet clothes in the laundry hamper even though there's no logical reason not to. After all, they're going to get wet eventually. You can't have a comfortable desk because it doesn't fit the decor. You can't not notice whether the house is neat or messy. You can't not share responsibility for domestic decisions the other person has made that you've gone along with to be nice but don't really care about. You can't hire a house cleaner because your maid is a socialist and can't live with the idea. You can't leave the bathroom door open. It's offensive. You can't leave the bathroom door closed. They need to get in. You can't enter without knocking. You can't leave the toilet seat up. You can't read on the John without commentary. You can't leave bloody things in the bathroom wastebasket. You can't leave female hygiene products out. You can't wash your dirty hands in the kitchen sink. You have to load the toilet paper over instead of under. You're not allowed to pay no attention to what you'd simply rather ignore, your own nose hair, underarm hair, or toenails. You can't not make the bed. You can't not express appreciation when the other person makes the bed, even if you don't care. You can't sleep apart. You can't go to bed at different times. You can't fall asleep on the couch without getting woken up to go to bed. You can't eat in bed. You can't get out of bed right away after sex. You can't have insomnia without being grilled about what's really bothering you. You can't turn the air conditioner up as high as you want. Think of the environment instead of yourself all the time. You can't sleep late if the other person has to get up early, or you can't sleep late because it's a sign of moral turpitude. You can't watch soap operas without getting made fun of. You can't watch infomercials or the pregame show or Martha Stewart or shows in which men are humiliated in front of women or are made to play the buffoon. You can't watch porn. You can't leave CNN on as background. You can't pathologically withdraw into sports even if it's your only mode of anxiety release. You can't listen to Bob Dylan or other excesses of your youth. You can't go out to play pinball. It's regressive. You can't smoke pot. You can't drink during the day, even on weekends. You can't take naps when the other person is home because the mate feels leisure time should be shared. You can't work when you're supposed to be relaxing. You can't spend too much time on the computer. You can't play Dungeons and Dragons and stay off those chat rooms. You can't have email flirtations, even if innocent. You can't play computer solitaire because the clicking drives the other person crazy. You can't talk on the phone when they're home working. You can't be rude to people who call on the phone for the mate. You can't just hang up on telemarketers. You must be polite. You can't talk on the phone when they're in the room without them commenting on the conversation or trying to talk to you at the same time. Your best friend can't call after 10. You can't read without starting to talk, and you're not allowed to read when they're talking to you. You can't not pay attention to their presence. You can't be impulsive, self-absorbed, or distracted. You can't take risks unless they're agreed upon risks, which somewhat limits the concept of risk. You can't just walk out on your job or quit in a huff. You can't make unilateral career decisions or change jobs without extensive discussions and negotiation. You can't have your own bank account. You can't make major purchases alone or spend money on things the other person considers excesses. You can't blow money just because you're in a really bad mood. You can't be in a bad mood without being required to explain it. You can't have secrets about money or anything else. It goes on and on and on for like 10, for like 4 or 5 more pages. And at the end of it, it says, "Thus is love obtained." Okay, through all this compromising and all this just petty unallowance of letting the person be who they are. Nitpicking, right? Virgos are very much guilty of this kind of stuff, unfortunately. The point isn't, I'm a Virgo, so I'm not knocking Virgos. The point isn't to pronounce judgment on whether or which such demands are reasonable, because the content doesn't matter. What matters is the form. Okay, the form of the relationship. She's being sarcastic. Can't make demands on whether it's reasonable. Men are usually thinking logically and reasonably, and in that way. Women are usually thinking more emotionally, and so there's this discrepancy of understanding. You misunderstand each other because a man is often coming from a totally different perspective than a woman about certain subjects. So as a man, it does get frustrating that you say, well, that's not logical, that's not reasonable, that doesn't make any sense, that's not logical. But to a woman, that doesn't mean anything. They're coming from the emotional side. So usually, of course, gender roles change, and some women are more manly than men. I'm just saying in the norm. And why has modern love developed in such a way as to maximize submission and minimize freedom with so little argument about it? No doubt a citizenry schooled in renouncing desires and whatever quantities of imagination and independence they come partnered with would be, in many respects, advantageous. Note that the conditions of lovability are remarkably convergent with those of a cowed workforce and a docile electorate. But if the most elegant forms of social control are those that come packaged in the guise of individual needs and satisfactions, so wedded to individual psyche that any opposing impulse registers as the anxiety of unlovability, who needs a policeman on every corner? How very convenient that we're so willing to police ourselves and those we love and call it living happily ever after. Perhaps a secular society needed another metaphysical entity to subjugate itself to after the death of God, and love was available for the job. But isn't it a little depressing to think we're somehow incapable of inventing forms of emotional life based on anything other than subjugation? Yeah. Interesting stuff. Let's say there's even sex, reliably satisfying, gets the job done sex. But how can that compare to the feeling of being reinvented, of being desired, of feeling fascinating? Okay, she was talking about adultery, when you cheat on your wife or whatever, you have this feeling of being reinvented and you're reawakened, and you have your desire is reawakened, and you feel fascinating again because it's all new. And when you've been in this stagnant relationship for 12 years or whatever, so even if you have reliable sex and all that, how can that compare to feeling reinvented? So that's why we want to stray often from our marriages, right? She's saying. A few more things to cover here, and then we're almost through. Okay, I'm gonna hit one of the best quotes here soon. she's saying most of us hold transparency as the sine qua non of intimacy, and most of us hold transparency, that you have to be super transparent and divulge everything to, having more than one desire may be modern. Okay, here's the quote that I like a lot, one of my favorites in here. Having more than one desire may be modern intimacy's biggest taboo, but cramming the entirety of a libido into those tight domestic confines and acquiescing to a world of pre-shrunk desires is, for some, also self-betrayal in the fullest. That is the most split and unreconciled sense of the word self. Okay, self-betrayal. Okay. Because if a big part of yourself, it depends on what type of person you are. Some people are more exploratory in nature. Some people are more homebound and more slow and more willing to stay in a relationship for a long period of time. Other people are more scattered and want to go in every direction and have a more exploratory path and pioneering path in life, and they're supposed to experience many different things. Other people are supposed to just kind of be stable and have this long, stable kind of relationship. Everybody's different, I do happen to be a more exploratory type person. I'm the explorer. Okay, I'm a very versatile, various person. Freedom, change, and I have a lot of number 5s in my numerology, which is all about freedom, travel, and change. Okay, so yes, it can be self-betrayal if you're that type of person and you subjugate all your libido and desires into only one thing for the rest of your life, because that's not who you are deep inside, right? You're betraying your own true nature and your own true self to want to explore and have many partnerships and have many relationships and do many different things and experience many different things in life. But it also depends on how old you are, how mature you are. You can have a sense of freedom there is a concept of freedom that you can have more. You can actually be more free the more disciplined and the more controlled you are. Imagine like a prisoner who actually becomes more free in his mind and kind of changes, because he's in prison. He can't do anything. He can't go anywhere. He's forced to start reading books, and he becomes this very smart, amazing person in prison because he has this discipline of the prison system, the daily routine. He only has so many choices, so if you limit your choices, you can sometimes actually become more free in some ways. So, there's different definitions of freedom and, exploration. You can explore the mind. You don't have to physically and externally and materialistically explore life always. You can be a traveler in here, through reading and whatnot. But what does lying to intimates mean but that some hapless individuals' emotions have fallen out of step with institutional dictates, that desires haven't fallen automatically into line like little gooselings? A more accurate description of the situation might be that we've mortgaged our emotional well-being to intimacy institutions that hinge on elaborate fictions themselves, at least to the extent that feelings are unpredictable, that desires aren't always coherent or static, that knowing what you want in the realm of love and intimacy isn't an exact science, and people do occasionally change. You can't legally or morally contract to uphold a contract based on false premises. You can't legally or morally contract to uphold a contract based on false premises if the conventions we're pledged to sustain aren't permanently sustainable, or not always and not for everyone, despite insisting on a no questions asked commitment to them. Well, who's being deceptive? Is it the form? Is it the social form of marriage that's being deceptive more so than the person that's the deceiver? But before you get any rash ideas about truth-telling or tunneling for freedom and making a run for it, remember that armed guards, children, public opinion, superegos patrol the perimeters, and the attack dogs are starved for scandal. She's talking about if you want to, leave the relationship. But love affairs can feel utterly transforming, and how few opportunities there are to feel that way in normal life, which by definition militates against transformation. You get to surrender to emotions you forgot you could have, to desire and to being desired. How overwhelming that can feel when it's been a while. And the thrill of the new thing, of course, but what really keeps you glued to the phone till all hours of the night? Conversations sparkling with soulfulness and depth you hadn't known you possessed, exchanging those searching whispered intimacies, is a very different new love object, yourself. Okay, I want to read that again because I don't think I had the right tone. You get to surrender to emotions you forgot you could have, to desire and to being desired. And the thrill of the new thing, of course, but what really keeps you glued to the phone till all hours of the night? Conversations sparkling with soulfulness and depth you hadn't known you possessed, exchanging those searching whispered intimacies, is a very different new love object, yourself. Okay? This is one of my other favorite quotes here. You re-find yourself. Okay, yourself has been squelched by this form of the form of relationships. That's why I'm a bigger fan of relation kayaks or relation bicycles, because a relation kayak is a more, a relationship, you're bundled together on one vessel. Relation kayak, yeah, there's tandem kayaks, but relation kayak, you can have one kayak here, in a single kayak, and you're meeting each other as individuals rather than both being on the same vessel, a ship, a relationship. Okay, a relation kayaks, plural. Okay, you're two kayaks. One person's in a kayak here, one person's in a kayak here, and you're meeting. That's how I prefer, not a relationship, not this shipness. Okay, not this ownershipness. Okay. So you rediscover yourself in the adulteration, in the strain from the relationship or whatever, okay? That's why people often do it. I'm not saying this is the case for me or for, everybody, just for certain people who are not, who don't maintain a level of self-awareness, who lose their self in the relationship, in that form, okay? Which is a lot of people, which is most people probably. Except for, older people that have, figured things out. But, this is mainly addressed to younger people. Of course, when it comes to consciousness, bodily sensations often do precede conscious analysis. Just as Marx observed long ago about the consciousness of overwork. You notice that you feel shitty and start to wonder why. Bodily sensations precede conscious analysis. So interesting. Going to have sex with this person, or you start, or health-wise, you don't become a very conscious person until you've gone through a lot of pain, is what they're saying here too. Like if you start to develop all these symptoms that, you feel shitty, your stomach hurts, your back hurts, you're tired all the time, then you start to become conscious of a lot of other things beyond just those things. It wakes you up because you now have to start researching how to fix these problems. You start to research other things. You start to become interested in other things in life and have an interest. You become interested in life and curious, and let's see. Here's another little thing. For the sake of children. Okay, what a noble sacrifice. Virtue is in your court. Okay, the whole cliche of staying together for the sake of the children. What a noble sacrifice. Virtue is in your court. Though needless to say, for the sake of the children is rather a selective enterprise holding sway far more frequently when it comes to guilty matters like divorce than when it comes to pocketbook issues like education spending. America ranks 14th in per capita dollars spent on education out of 15 industrialized countries. Or when it comes to every other form of childhood health and well-being, the U.S. ranks 28th in infant mortality rates, which means behind virtually every other industrialized nation in the world, and 1 in 5 of the surviving American kids lives in poverty. Sentimentality about children's welfare comes and goes, apparently. Highest when there's the chance to moralize about adult behavior, lowest when it comes to resource allocation. Very poignant point there, Laura Kipnis. But if women's post-divorce income drops an average of 30%, if the single-parent household is a predictor of poverty, it turns out that cushioning children from the economic consequences of divorce or single parenthood is a simple matter of formulating social policy that conforms to the reality of the lives of the citizenry instead of moralizing at them. As Sweden's system of guaranteed child allocations proves with its childhood poverty rate of under 3% compared with 22% with our preferred method, which is to ignore reality, let everyone fend for themselves, and blame the consequences on lax morals or not working hard enough, whether at marriage or the minimum wage jobs that produce the poverty in the first place. Here's another little interesting thing. Does divorce harm children? Should be compared to what? Compared to contexts of chronic unhappiness and dissatisfaction, to unmet needs as status quo, to bitching mothers, remote fathers, and other gendered forms of quotidian misery? Is it really likely that the majority of unhappy parents are also such master thespians that kids remain unaffected by family contexts of emotional distance or sexual coldness or mutual disrespect or long-term disappointment? Unfortunately, what "for the sake of the children" really means is multi-generational training grounds for lowered expectations as an effective norm. For that's just the way it is, as a guide to living. For the idea that change spells catastrophe and trauma, and wanting anything more or different is ridiculous. Okay, this is what you end up programming into your child if you stay in an unhappy relationship, and that is, more damaging than divorcing a person, It's also too bad if presenting false images of your own emotional state seems like the only way to have the authenticity you want with your kids, or another instance of the everyday deceptions required to sustain normal life. Okay, now I really am almost done. I think that's just almost about it. There might be one more thing I have underlined here. She has this whole long chapter about political cases of infidelity and stuff, and I didn't really find that all that interesting. It's like the last like 40 so pages of the book, I kind of read only half of it because I didn't really find it all that interesting, but I found most of it interesting in the beginning. So I think there's one more thing here. In his essay Flirtation, the quirky German sociologist George Simmel, a contemporary of Freud's, notes that love has a tendency to expire with the fulfillment of its yearning. Love has a tendency to expire with the fulfillment of its yearning. If love lies on a path from not having to having, Simmel says, invoking Plato, then possessing what you wanted changes the nature of the enterprise, and along with it, the pleasure in it. Once you have something, how can you want it? Hence the evolution of flirting, a way of being suspended between having and not having, and keeping possibilities open. Being suspended between consent and refusal is the path to freedom, says Simmel. Any decision brings flirtation to an end. Okay, a little interesting perspective on flirtation. Let me just read the last chapter, or the last paragraph, just so I can, give credit and vindicate this author and, complete this talk. Maybe no one can be against love, but it's still possible to flirt with the idea, or as Adam Phillips asks in his own later essay on the virtues of flirtation, what does commitment leave out of the picture that we might want? Note that against is one of the few words like cleave, another that can mean both itself and its opposite. It flirts with paradox, as perhaps does anyone who loves. To cleave is to split or sever, but to cleave is also to cling to, or remain faithful, as with against. To be against means to be opposed, resistant, or defiant. It also means next to, beside, or near, which leaves the problem of a phrase like up against a wall, which is indeterminate, bivalent. It can play both sides of the street. Up against love, you would need to know the context to figure out what it means. Or alter the context, here's an idea to flirt with, which could make it mean something else entirely. Okay, alter the context. Okay, don't just take the programming context. the context that's given you. Okay, Laura Kipnis, Against Love, a polemic. Okay, hope you guys enjoyed it. She's kind of difficult to understand sometimes because she does use a lot of big words. Look up the words if you didn't know some of them, like tacit or, whatever I mentioned. Not everybody knows all these big words. So, yeah, hope you enjoyed it. Check out my other videos on love. I have one called What is Love? I have one, it's about astrology and in regard to love, and math in regard to love, mathematics. And matches, how to match yourself astrologically, and things like that. So check it out. If you like a consultation on nutrition or numerology, which are my two specialties, hit me up at collinchi@gmail.com. Otherwise, hope you enjoyed it. As always, love in a non-conformist, programmed way. Make your own kind of love. Collin Chi, certified nutritional consultant. Rise.